who descended upon Daystar, and you declared openly that their union was a covenantal one. Is it possible for you to do that without consulting Lisa to hear her perspective? I could care less. One advantage of my age is that I couldn't care less. My quality of life is good, you know. On live television, nobody was anticipating this to occur. Things were going swimmingly until Pastor Jimmy Evans and Joni Lamb took a seat. The entire studio became silent as soon as he spoke. What he disclosed regarding Joni, her decisions, and what has transpired held their breath as they watched what was happening behind the scenes. A sea of shocked viewers descended upon the discussion. There was no script for this. It altered everything because it was honest, unfiltered, and shocking. Everyone was taken aback when Jimmy Evans spoke. For he had been a constant source of peace during those turbulent years. Regardless of the chaos unfolding behind the scenes, the Lamb family could always rely on the wise pastor to provide them with consolation. He preferred to keep his private life private and avoid public eye. For that reason, when he ultimately let go of his complete stillness, the Daystar universe and all those who inhabited it came to a halt in astonishment. A private, never-to-be-heard communication was the spark that ignited the whole thing. It contained Jimmy's long-ago recollections of a family meeting. The moment someone asked him to do something that didn't set well with him was the moment he described the essence of his being. The goal is to make Jonathan Lamb see his mother Joni as divinely sent to a position of subservience. It had more to do with leadership and respect for family than that. The theme was submission. Unquestioned, absolute following orders. According to Jimmy, he was on the fence, but in that tight, weighty chamber, he finally agreed. In an effort to maintain peace and prevent matters from getting worse, he informed Jonathan that his mother spoke on God's behalf. However, uttering those words made him feel uneasy, as soon as he departed from their presence, that the experience weighed him down like a stone. By defending the ministry and maintaining unity, he had convinced himself that he was acting morally. But he felt in his heart that being silent was more of a sign of fear than commitment. For a long time, Jimmy hid his feelings of remorse, reasoning that it was better that way, to reawaken long-buried hurts. He made no attempt to downplay or ignore the recording's release. Calmly and modestly, he verified it. Recognizing his error, he confessed that he had supported an oppressive system that lacked godliness. Instantaneous effects were felt. No one could believe what they were hearing, including pastors, viewers, and Daystar's long-standing followers. Joni Lamb had been revered as a rock of faith for many years. Now, though, tough questions were being asked. Did this genuinely represent the ministry's inner workings? Did power hold more sway than the truth? No one could extinguish the spark that Jimmy's subtle admission ignited. He remained silent and refrained from making accusations. The truth he spoke louder than any preaching. He stated his desire for an end to cover-ups and for freedom from authority and an opportunity to be forthright at last. There was no desire for vengeance in his decision to break the silence. It was all about purification, about exposing areas that had been concealed by darkness to the light. Jimmy Evans didn't only expose a moment when he did this, he divulged a system. A time of mending was to be anticipated. That was the beginning, with the faintest of hopes that the Lamb family could find a peaceful place to sit down and chat openly again, after all the hurt and uncertainty. Filmmakers and cameras are absent. No forced grins, simply loved ones. While he watched the world around him fall apart, Jonathan Lamb had been carrying doubts for a long time. He was deeply committed to his family, his religion, and the ministry that his father had established. He wasn't angry or proud when he requested a family gathering. I was so desperate that I did it. He was seeking disclosure. A posh boardroom was not the location of the meeting. Daystar business or TV scheduling had nothing to do with it. It hit close to home. Everyone who mattered was invited. Everyone from his brothers and spouses to long-lost acquaintances who had supported the family, and even Jimmy Evans, the guy who had served as a mentor and counselor. The wall of quiet that had formed following Marcus Lamb's death, Jonathan hoped, might be broken if only people could communicate freely, would eventually descend. It seemed doable for an instant. Jonathan felt a small glimmer of relief as Joni showed up. Maybe now was the time for her to listen. Perhaps things would be different this time. Being truthful and not involved in a cover-up stood up. Because of that, we are now fully independent, not beholden to any powerful entity or control, and we can speak out against injustice, stand up for what's right, and support others who have also experienced trauma. Cultural norm violations or abuse, it promotes the practice of concealment. Oh, we are ecstatic that we may be a light that draws attention to the shadows and makes room for the Lord to cleanse the church. So, we'd like to say thank you to everyone who has written to us, shown support, and shown their love. It has truly been rather overwhelming. That optimism, however, began to wane as soon as the conference commenced. There was a palpable electric energy in the room. Even though nobody spoke out, the tension was palpable. Dear Jonathan got off to a thoughtful, respectful start. The abruptness of events, the lack of consultation in decision-making, and the crushing blow to the ministry's foundation, their family, were all topics of his grieving speech. None of them were named by him. He merely requested candor. Subsequently, others started to divulge. While others talked through tears, some spoke with a quiet melancholy. Feelings of being replaced, disregarded, or shut out were mentioned. Years of pent-up pain finally surfaced. Things that had previously been said in whispers were now being spoken out loud. Everything changed, though, when Joni got up to speak. She retrieved her phone from her backpack, set a timer, and proceeded to ignore the speaker, saying, "You each have 60 seconds," she continued, with a level face. Everyone believed she was kidding at first. It wasn't her. The crowd became silent as the speaker proceeded to give each participant 1 minute to process years of loss, bewilderment, and betrayal. The room went silent as people stared at each other in disbelief. The clock was ticking, and each speaker did their best to condense a lifetime of suffering into just 1 minute. As the final person spoke, Joni rose to her feet, took stock of her surroundings, and declared that, after she went, the room fell silent as she collected her belongings and departed. There was no prayer, no embrace, no resolution. All she had was a flight to New York to see Doug Weiss. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner, and everyone sat there trying to make sense of what had transpired. The room was filled with sadness, not anger, and Jonathan knew then that the woman he had hoped to reconnect with wasn't. It had transformed from a ministry of love and family into a kingdom of control. Jimmy Evans, who was seated at the room's corner, also sensed this shift. She was no longer there in the same manner he remembered her. The encounter, he would later confess, had no spiritual quality at all. Rather, it had an air of tension, of being highly staged, and he froze when someone leaned over him and implored him to advise Jonathan to submit to his mother, sought to avoid becoming involved. But in that instant, he caved. He reiterated what they wanted to hear, that Joni was the voice of God in Jonathan's life and that he had to obey her. But he had to obey her. The words weighed heavily on his mind. Even as he spoke them, Jimmy felt a crushing sense of remorse. That was the tipping point for Jonathan and Susie. They left the meeting not furious but emotionally empty. Realized they couldn't continue to pretend or remain silent to preserve an image that no longer represented reality. It wasn't revolt, but survival. They had to face the reality that things would never return to as they were, witnessed an overwhelming amount. Subsequently, things became increasingly distant. Joni refrained from making contact. Those who had previously supported the family began to withdraw their support. Denise Boggs, a trusted friend and counselor, was one of several who attempted to intervene. In her moving letters, Boggs pleaded with Joni to take it easy, listen, and heal before jumping into a new relationship with Doug Weiss, warning that her pride and hurry were causing her to make poor decisions. Nevertheless, Joni remained silent and encircled herself with those who would not challenge her or give her the answers she desired. The message was crystal clear: either you give in or you go. With no room for negotiation, the submit or go mentality started to mold the family and the ministry. Jonathan and Susie distanced themselves from Daystar without making any public statements or venting their frustrations online. Just walked away since staying would have been too much of a loss for them. Viewers started to notice that Jonathan and Susie weren't on the show. They tried to justify their absence with family priorities and general terms like time off, but it was obvious to them. Daystar had lost its once charismatic personality. Its grins appeared forced and its vitality seemed wrong. A deluge of emails and texts demanded an explanation, but the family never received one. The discussion, which began with optimism, ultimately revealed long-suppressed truths, not merely those pertaining to loss or familial strife, but also to issues of power, control, and silence, turning what ought to have been a safe place for openness into an impasse. Everyone who remained had to comply, while those who couldn't departed. Jimmy Evans would never forget that day. The words he spoke troubled him, and the subsequent quiet troubled everyone else. Jonathan and Susie's vision of the perfect Christian family, the united ministry, and the bright light was shattered the moment they met. They realized then that you can't mend something that doesn't want to be fixed. In that one room, the ice cracked, shattering the illusion for millions. After that, nothing was the same. Some wounds don't bleed where others may see them. They lurk behind years of silence, under-polished smiles, and Sunday sermons. For the Lamb family, long before the cameras stopped rolling and the public became aware of the problem, that hidden wound had begun. Like all tragedies, it began quietly, in the space where love and denial meet. Jonathan Lamb never anticipated being the one to discover a secret that would break his heart. From the outside looking in. Behind the scenes, his life was about to undergo a dramatic transformation. It started with his daughter, who was young, innocent, and suddenly changed. She no longer laughed in the same manner. He was the devoted son, the steady presence behind his father, Marcus, and the man prepared to continue the family's history, subsided and became more distant. And Jonathan couldn't shake the uneasy sensation that something was amiss. At first, he tried to convince himself that it was simply stress, a passing phase. However, the symptoms persisted and eventually became too much to bear. Eventually, the reality emerged. A father's heart breaks as he learns the unimaginable, that a close family member had physically and emotionally harmed his daughter in the worst way imaginable. The revelation was slow, painful, and awful. Jonathan's whole world came crashing down the instant he recognized it. He didn't waste a second. He didn't try to disguise it. He rushed directly to his parents, expecting the people who had formed their lives around religion. Truth, and Marcus, his father, was the leader of Daystar and a powerful man revered across the Christian world. He listened but remained unmoved, and he found no one in his family to support him or look out for his daughter. Informed Jonathan that they had previously investigated the situation. An internal review and a few conversations had taken place, and that, in his opinion, had sufficed. No outside investigators, no police, just private discussions. And Marcus had announced that the matter had been resolved. The accused had been cleared. The case was concluded. However, for Jonathan, it had only just begun. He looked to his mother, Joni, expecting that she would understand what Marcus couldn't. He hoped that she would experience the same emotions he had. The terror, the anguish, the protective impulse. But she didn't. She didn't believe him. She protected Marcus, defended the accused, and cut off the discussion before it could continue. "We've handled it," she murmured, as if those words clarified everything. May undo the previous actions. She refrained from inquiring. Jonathan understood he was alone. Second, she avoided looking him in the eye while she comforted her granddaughter, Chan. The treachery pierced deeper then, that their entire life's work, Daystar, was founded upon one crime. It wasn't enough that they refused to believe him. They prioritized appearances above reality. To them, a single scandal could bring down all they had worked for. They hoped the secret would fade away if no one ever spoke of it again. So they buried it. However, silence does not cure. On the contrary, it furs, growing silent in the dark until it poisons all around. There were family dinners, holiday gatherings, and broadcasts about forgiveness and faith as if nothing had happened. Jonathan pretended to be happy and even prayed with his parents and played the part, but deep down, he felt like a piece of himself had been shattered. Sermons about healing sounded hollow. He saw his parents teach the truth to millions of people but deny it at home, and the hypocrisy was palpable. He and his wife, Susie, did their best to keep things together, but it was all hollow and meaningless. As a couple, they sought to shield their daughter from harm and provide her with a normal existence. But the burden of what had happened and hadn't followed them everywhere. They avoided discussing it since it brought up painful memories that no one wanted to revisit. However, for Jonathan, the weight of knowing the truth but being unable to voice it lifted when Marcus passed away, and he began to wonder whether things may finally begin to change now that Joni was no longer alive. Soften. Perhaps she would wish to rectify the situation. However, the opposite occurred. Things merely became worse. A few weeks later, she was back on television, grinning, preaching, and carrying on as if nothing had transpired. Then along came Doug Weiss. Jonathan felt betrayed at the final family meeting since his father's death had not yet laid to rest, and his mother was already rewriting their lives. Tale with a new love and a new chapter, a new face, a new love, and everything was happening too quickly. Later on, he longed for her to listen, for her to understand his anguish and the truth about what had transpired all those years ago. However, the same barrier stood between them, and he was once again instructed to submit, obey, and accept his mother's authority as divine. Jonathan knew there would be no healing here or with her. The same lady who had turned a blind eye to his daughter's pain was now expecting spiritual obedience. His wife, Susie, had been silent for years in an effort to protect their family's seclusion. She started speaking softly at first, and then more freely, about the anguish of seeing truth buried under religion, about the cost of remaining faithful to a lie. She didn't do it to criticize anyone, but the stillness had grown intolerable. Someone had to do it, she said. People in the ministry began to whisper and ask questions. Some were devastated to hear the truth, like Denise Boggs, who had prayed with the Lambs for decades. Denise pleaded with Joni to stop pretending to face what was broken. Instead of letting pride get in the way of choosing truth, Joni surrounded herself with individuals who believed what she believed and referred to her decisions as anointed. With Doug Weiss out of the picture, she continued forward, her son, her granddaughter, her family, and the truth itself. The hurt she caused wasn't merely emotional. It was spiritual. A family that preaches truth but refuses to face it at home causes its foundation to crumble. The audience had no idea what it was hard to put their finger on it, but something had changed. The broadcasts no longer seemed personal or genuine, and that was the secret wound, the unspoken betrayal that lurked under the surface. Subtle. Concealed beneath sermons and smiles, words carefully selected and broadcasted. However, it was always there, throbbing beneath every mention of God bless you and every discussion of faith and forgiveness. Until it was confronted, it would continue to bleed. There was a time when Dare for Millions, it was more than just a Christian network. It was a sanctuary where they could find solace, a spiritual community brimming with faith and purpose and a source of inspiration, family, and hope. Marcus and Joni Lamb, where Marcus's death revealed a devastated widow clutching her son's body as they stood together in unity, smiling for the camera, holding hands, and spoke about love and trust in God. The scene was idyllic, but little did anyone know that something was slowly unraveling behind those bright studio lights. Moving on to faith, however, something else was transpiring within the walls of Daystar. Rather of decreasing her pace in order to recuperate, Joni proceeded at a pace that stunned those around her. Within weeks, she was back on the radio, discussing God's plan and the future. Within months, she thrust Doug Weiss into her life. Those closest to her felt it was rushed and forced, as if she was attempting to fill an unfillable need. The public was confused at first, with supporters wanting to believe it was love that God had sent. It was a new beginning for her after all the pain she had endured. But others, particularly in the ministry, started to wonder if she was really trying to move on or if she was trying to escape something. Then news of Joni and Doug's relationship broke, and the marriage became more than just a marriage. Behind the scenes, the staff began to notice a change. Meetings that were once brimming with prayer and shared vision suddenly felt more like battles. For some, it represented hope, while for others, it screamed denial and control. Feeling strained and constrained, long-term employees suddenly found themselves on the outside looking in. Doubt and questions were not accepted, and the builders of Daystar started to vanish, with some leaving quietly. Others were expelled as well, but no one spoke publicly about it since it was better to keep quiet. By that point, Jonathan and Susie Lamb had already left. They couldn't abide by an untruthful position. Their departure was long-standing viewers sensed something was missing. The heart had left the programs, which continued as if nothing had changed. The music, the smiles, the words, faith, family, and integrity. No one ever explained why, though. Daystar's former charm had been supplanted by cold control, and tensions were at an all-time high when an audio tape of Jimmy Evans came to light online. In the clip, Evans confessed to having been directed to advise Jonathan to submit to Joni as if she were God's voice. The video went viral, and many people's suspicions were confirmed that something was seriously amiss behind the scenes, undermining the foundation of faith that had once supported the ministry. Appeared to be a system based on manipulation and control. The response was swift. Questions and fury flooded social media. Longtime supporters wanted answers, and pastors and contributors started too. They retreated, avoiding any association with the issue. Those who believed in Daystar's ability to heal were let down when they realized that Joni's every post and comment sounded scripted and defensive. The more she attempted to manage the narrative, the less impact it had. Within the studio, the atmosphere was as tense. Employees murmured to one another in the corridors. Some had been privy to the family problems for some time, but never expected to witness them arise. Others were. They were stunned to see how their beloved ministry had transformed into something quite different. Loyalty to Joni became the new rule, and anyone who dared to question her leadership was branded as disloyal or not doing what God wanted. The consequences became worse as the months passed. When donations started to fall and sponsors backed out, longtime fans stopped watching. Churches that had shown Daystar programming discreetly deleted it, and Joni refused to confront the underlying issues. Instead, she posed on camera smiling as if nothing was wrong, talking about bounties and restoration as the ground beneath her crumbled. You mentioned that the worst part was how familiar it all looked. This wasn't the first time a ministry had collapsed under the pressure of secrecy and pride. However, for those who had trusted in Daystar, this one felt personal. This was supposed to be the network that championed self-restraint and authenticity, about speaking the truth even when it hurts. Instead, it was covering up its mistakes, erasing its past, and preserving its public image in lieu of actual human beings. In the background, Joni's social circle shrank as her once doubting friends retreated, replaced by those who spoon-fed her the answers she desired. Doug Weiss solidified his position as an ever-present figure, and anyone who dared to challenge his authority was subtly expelled. A family-run ministry had transformed into a fortress, guarded, defensive, and founded on fear rather than faith.